Marcus Cole shoved the younger boy into the lockers before the first bell had even finished ringing. The sound of metal hitting metal rang through the hallway like a gunshot, and every student within 20 feet flinched, every single one of them except Marcus. He stood there with his backpack hanging off one shoulder and a slow smile spreading across his face, watching the boy slide down against the cold metal and scramble to pick up the books that had scattered across the floor. Nobody moved to help. Nobody said a word. They all just watched, the way people watch a fire close enough to see it, far enough not to get burned. The boy on the floor was Eli Marsh. He was 15 years old, medium height, thin in the way that boys are thin when they eat whatever their mothers pack and never think about it. He had brown hair that always looked like he had just woken up, and glasses that had a small crack in the left lens that he had never gotten fixed because he did not want to bother his mother about it. He was the kind of boy who apologized when someone bumped into him. The kind who held doors open even for people who were still far away. The kind who, when he sat in a room full of people, somehow managed to be invisible. That invisibility used to protect him. Then Marcus Cole decided it made him a good target. It had started 6 weeks earlier, during the first week of the school year, when Eli had accidentally sat at the wrong lunch table. He had not known it was the wrong table. There was no sign. There was no rule written anywhere. But Marcus had walked over, placed both palms flat on the table, leaned down so that his face was level with Eli's, and said very quietly that Eli was in his seat. Eli had picked up his tray and moved without a single word. He had thought that would be the end of it. It was not the end of it. Something about Eli's silence seemed to invite more. Not encourage it, not deserve it, but invite it in the way that open windows invite wind. Marcus began stopping by Eli's locker in the mornings. He would stand too close. He would make comments about whatever Eli was wearing or carrying. He called him a nickname that had started as something small and meaningless, and had grown, over the weeks, into something that everyone in the junior corridor recognized. When Eli walked past a group of Marcus's friends, one of them would say the nickname and the rest would laugh, and Eli would keep walking with his eyes forward and his jaw tight. Marcus Cole was 17 years old and built like someone who had spent 2 summers doing nothing but training. He played on the school's football team and was good enough that the coach called him by his first name in the hallway, which none of the other players got. His grades were average, but his presence was not. There was something about the way Marcus moved through a school hallway that made it feel like the hallway belonged to him. He took up space without apology. He looked people in the eye a beat too long, long enough to make them look away first, and when they did, something in his face settled into satisfaction. He was not stupid. That was what made it worse. Stupid cruelty can sometimes be outweighted, outlasted. Marcus was calculating in a way that was hard to explain and even harder to prove. He never touched Eli in front of a teacher. He never said anything in a classroom. Everything happened in the hallways, at the bus stop, in the brief chaotic minutes between periods when supervision was thin and noise was high, and one boy's shoulder hitting another boy's shoulder could always be called an accident. He had 3 friends, who followed his lead the way shadows follow a body. There was Craig, who was wide and quiet and laughed at everything Marcus did. There was Pete, who was smaller and faster, always moving, always scanning, always the first to pull out his phone when something was happening that he thought should be recorded. And there was Owen, who was the one Marcus actually talked to, actually confided in, and who sometimes looked uncomfortable during the worst moments but never said so out loud. These 4 boys had been together since middle school. They shared the particular bond of boys who have grown up beside each other, who have seen each other fail and embarrass themselves, and still come back the next day. That bond is strong. Sometimes it is stronger than knowing the difference between right and wrong. The hallway where Marcus had just shoved Eli was on the 2nd floor of Westfield High School, in a city that sat at the edge of a wide river, and had 2 diners and 1 movie theater, and a football team that the whole town followed on Friday nights. It was the kind of place where everyone knew each other's last name and most people's business, and where reputations, once built, were nearly impossible to take apart. Marcus Cole had a reputation. It was the kind of reputation that adults called rough around the edges, and students called something else entirely. Eli got up from the floor. He picked up his books one by one slowly without rushing, which took courage that nobody in that hallway bothered to recognize. He put them in his bag. He adjusted his glasses. He walked to class. He did not cry until he was in the bathroom, in the stall at the far end, with his back against the cold tile wall and both hands pressed over his mouth so that nobody would hear him. He allowed himself exactly 2 minutes. He had learned to count it out. 2 minutes and then it was over, and he washed his face and went back into the day. His mother, Carol Marsh, was a woman who worked long hours at a medical billing office and came home smelling of coffee and stress, and always asked how his day was with the kind of hope that made lying feel necessary. Eli told her it was fine. He had been telling her it was fine for 6 weeks. The word fine had become the heaviest word in his vocabulary. He had one friend at school, a girl named Lucy who sat next to him in biology and who knew, generally, that things were hard for him but did not know the specifics. He had kept the specifics from her too, because telling someone makes it more real, and Eli was still operating on the fragile belief that if he waited long enough, Marcus would get bored and move on. That belief was beginning to crack. On the Thursday of that same week, Marcus was in a particularly sharp mood. His team had lost a game the previous Friday, badly, and the coach had called him out by name in front of everyone, and Marcus had stored that embarrassment the way certain people store things, not released, not processed, just compressed and set aside until something smaller and easier became available to receive it. Eli became available. It was after school, at the bottom of the wide front steps, where students gathered to wait for buses and rides in the slow arrival of late parents. Marcus came up behind Eli, grabbed the strap of his backpack, and pulled hard enough that Eli stumbled backward and had to grab the railing to keep from falling down the steps. People saw it. People looked, and then people looked away, because looking away is easier than the alternative, and most people under pressure choose the easier thing. Eli gripped the railing. He straightened himself. He turned around and looked at Marcus. That look, that silent, clear, uncollapsed look, seemed to bother Marcus more than any response Eli could have given. Marcus leaned forward, said something low and cutting, and then laughed and walked down the steps to where Craig and Pete were waiting for him. Pete had his phone out. He was filming. That video existed somewhere, on Pete's phone in his gallery, possibly shared with a small group, possibly not. Eli did not know about it at the time. He would find out later. He would find out in the way that you find out about things that have been happening behind your back all at once, in a way that makes the floor feel unsteady. But on that Thursday afternoon, standing at the top of the school steps, Eli only knew that his hands were shaking, and that the railing under his fingers was cold, and that somewhere behind him, he could still hear Marcus laughing. He had a sister. Her name was Nina. She was 23, and she lived on the other side of town, and she worked at the district office doing administrative work that she described as managing chaos for people who create it. Eli trusted her more than he trusted anyone. He had not told her anything about Marcus Cole. He had not told her because she had a way of acting on things, and he was not ready for anything to be acted on. He walked home that afternoon. It was a 40-minute walk, and he did it on purpose, because the bus meant a chance of running into Marcus, and the walk meant 40 minutes of quiet, which he had started to think of as medicine. He walked past the corner store, and the church with the broken fountain out front, and the row of narrow houses where the old man on the end always sat on his porch and lifted one hand as people went by. The leaves were starting to turn. It was mid-October, and the air had that particular quality that October air has, cool and dry and carrying the smell of something ending. Eli walked with his hands in his pockets and his eyes on the sidewalk, and he thought about the same thing he had been thinking about for weeks. How much longer he could keep doing this? He did not have an answer yet, but the question was getting louder. He got home, made himself a sandwich, sat at the kitchen table and opened his homework. His mother would be back at 6. He had 2 hours. He put his earphones in and played music that his sister had recommended, and that he had never told her he loved. Outside, the October light was thinning, going gold and then gray, the way it does before the dark comes. Inside, Eli ate his sandwich and did his homework, and did not let himself think about tomorrow. He was 15 years old, and he was already learning how to survive the present by refusing to look at the future. That is not something a 15-year-old should have to learn. But some of them do. And the ones who do are usually the ones who have had no other choice. Marcus Cole went home that evening and ate dinner and watched television and slept deeply, the way people sleep when they are not carrying anything they are afraid to put down. He did not think about Eli Marsh. He did not think about the railing or the look or Pete's phone. He thought about the upcoming game. He thought about the scholarship letter he was expecting in the spring. He thought about how good next year was going to be. He fell asleep before 10. He did not dream about any of it. He never did. The next morning, Marcus arrived at school 17 minutes before the first bell, which was early for him. He had a reason. He wanted to be at the locker before Eli arrived. He had something new he wanted to say. He stood at the end of the corridor, leaning against the wall, his phone in his hand, not looking at it. Waiting. And the thing about Marcus Cole, the thing that would matter much later, when all of this was over and the consequences had arrived, and he was sitting somewhere very different from this hallway trying to understand what had happened. The thing that mattered was this. He was not angry at Eli. He did not hate him. He had simply found something that worked, something that made him feel large, and he had kept doing it the way you keep doing anything that makes you feel large when other things are making you feel small. He was 17 years old, and he was already building the walls of a cage he did not know he was standing inside. He waited in the corridor. Eli arrived at 8:14. The day began. Eli Marsh opened his locker and stared at the inside of it for a moment before realizing that something was different. Someone had written the nickname on the inside of the locker door. In marker, black, 2 words. It had been done recently, the ink had not faded. He stood there reading it. Then he closed the locker door, very carefully, the way you close something you do not want to break. He turned around. Marcus was standing 10 feet away, watching him and smiling. And somewhere behind Marcus, Pete already had his phone out. Eli looked at Marcus. Marcus looked at Eli. The hallway moved around them like a river moves around 2 stones. Then the bell rang, and Eli turned and walked to class and did not look back. He was 15 years old. He had decided something, standing at that locker, reading those 2 words in black marker. He had decided that he was done waiting. He just had not figured out yet what that meant. But something had shifted. Something very quietly had begun. Marcus Cole had no idea. He never did. Not yet. It was a Wednesday in October when the stranger appeared at the bus stop. It was not a dramatic entrance. There was no music, no warning, no signal that anything unusual was about to happen. He simply walked up, stood at the edge of the group waiting for the number 12 bus, and looked down the road the way everyone else was looking, checking for the bus the way people do when they are in no hurry but would prefer not to wait longer than necessary. He was mid-50s, medium height. He wore a gray jacket that had seen better years and carried a canvas bag over one shoulder. His face was the kind of face that had lived through things, not dramatic things necessarily, but real things, the kind that settle into the skin over time and make a person look more solid than they might otherwise appear. His name was Alan Briggs. He was a retired postal worker. He had delivered mail on 3 different routes over 22 years and had seen more of this neighborhood than most people who had lived in it their whole lives. He knew which houses had dogs. He knew which families had grown and which had shrunk. He knew the particular quality of silence that a street has at 7 in the morning versus the same street at 3 in the afternoon. He also knew, from 2 decades of watching, what a certain kind of behavior looked like when it was happening in front of him. He had watched Marcus and his friends for exactly 4 minutes before he said anything. Those 4 minutes were enough. Marcus had been going through his usual routine, not violent, not dramatic, nothing that could be pointed at and called proof of anything specific. Just the steady, low-level pressure that is harder to name and easier to miss if you are not looking carefully. Standing too close, saying the nickname, letting the laughter spread to Craig and Pete while Eli stood slightly apart from the group, holding his backpack straps the way someone holds onto something when the ground feels uncertain. Owen was standing slightly back from the others. He was looking at his phone in that way that people look at their phones when they are not actually reading anything on them, just using the screen as an excuse not to look at what is in front of them. Alan Briggs watched all of this. He was not a dramatic man. He did not believe in speeches. In 22 years of delivering mail, he had learned that most of what needed to be said could be said in a few words, and that most people said too many. He looked at Marcus Cole and said, quietly, almost to no one in particular, the way you might say something while looking out a window. Son, whatever you are building here, it comes back, every time. That was it, 10 words, maybe 11. Marcus turned and looked at him. There was a beat of silence, the kind of silence that appears when something unexpected has walked into a moment that was going according to plan. Then Marcus laughed. It was not a small laugh. It was the full version, the performance version, the one designed to communicate that what had just happened was so ridiculous, so completely outside the range of things worth taking seriously, that the only reasonable response was laughter. Craig joined in immediately. Pete looked up from his phone and grinned. Owen smiled, but it was slower, and it did not quite reach his eyes. One of them, it was Pete, probably Pete, said something like, "Okay, old man," in a tone that was not quite loud enough to be confrontational, but was loud enough to be heard. Alan Briggs did not react. He looked at Marcus for one more second, and then he turned back toward the road and watched for the bus. The bus arrived 40 seconds later. Everyone boarded. Alan sat near the front. Marcus and his friends went to the back, which is where they always sat, which Marcus had made a rule without ever stating it out loud. Eli found a seat in the middle. He looked out the window at the passing street, the dry leaves moving on the sidewalk, the morning sky pale and wide above the rooflines. He had heard Alan Briggs's words. He had heard them the way you hear something when it is said not at you, but somehow still for you, when the words land in a place inside you that was already open and waiting for something to fill it. He thought about them for the rest of the bus ride. Marcus did not think about them at all. Not that day. School passed the way it usually passed for both of them, but differently. Marcus moved through it with the ease of someone for whom the hallways and classrooms and social architecture of that building had been arranged for his specific comfort. He was not entirely wrong about this. His name was known. His jersey number was known. The coach had recommended him to 2 different colleges, and there was a letter coming in the spring, and everyone who mattered seemed to know about the letter. He took his usual seat in history, ignored most of the lecture, sent messages to Craig during the break between classes, and ate lunch at his regular table where there was always room, and where no one sat without knowing they were welcome. He thought about the stranger at the bus stop twice. Both times the thought arrived as a small flicker of amusement, the memory of the laugh, and then it was gone, replaced by whatever was in front of him. He thought about the upcoming game on Friday. He thought about his mother who had promised to come this time, which she had also promised the previous 3 times and not managed. He thought about the spring. He thought about the letter. He did not think about Eli Marsh. He did not think about Pete's phone. Eli Marsh sat in class and kept his face still, and his handwriting small, and his questions to himself. He was good at school in the way that people are good at things they have poured energy into because it was the one place they could. His grades were strong. His teachers liked him. His biology teacher, a woman named Mrs. Hollies who wore bright cardigans and asked follow-up questions that proved she had actually listened, had told him 2 weeks earlier that he had the best analytical instincts in the class. He had thanked her and gone home and thought about it for the rest of the evening. In the cafeteria, he sat with Lucy. Lucy was the kind of person who talked enough for both of them on the days he did not feel like talking, and who went quiet with him on the days she could tell he needed that instead. She had known him since 6th grade. She did not know everything, but she knew enough to sometimes look at him with a question in her eyes that she did not put into words, because she understood that putting it into words would require him to answer. He was grateful for that. That day over lunch, she talked about a documentary she had seen the night before about deep-sea creatures, and Eli listened and asked questions, and for 20 minutes felt something that was close to normal. Not entirely, but close. The afternoon came and went. After school, at the bus stop again, Marcus was loud with his friends about something that had happened during practice the previous day, something that involved a particularly good play he had made, and that he had already recounted 3 times that week. His friends laughed where they were supposed to laugh. Eli stood slightly away from the group and waited for the bus, his bag hanging off one shoulder, his eyes on the road. He was thinking about Alan Briggs again, about those 10 words, about the particular way the man had said them, not angry, not afraid, not performative, just direct, like someone stating a fact about the weather. Whatever you are building here, it comes back, every time. It was the every time that stayed with Eli, the certainty of it, not might come back, not could, every time, said with the quiet confidence of someone who had watched it happen enough to stop being surprised by it. Eli did not know who the man was. He had not seen him before. He might never see him again. But he had heard him. And the words had gone somewhere inside him that he could not quite reach, but could definitely feel. He got home and did his homework and ate dinner with his mother, who asked how his day was and got fine as an answer again. And then he went to his room and lay on his bed and stared at the ceiling for a long time. He had a sister. Her name was Nina. She was 23 years old and she worked at the district office, and she had, on more than one occasion, described herself as someone who managed chaos for people who create it. She was efficient and careful, and she remembered things precisely, which was useful in her job and occasionally exhausting in her personal life. Eli had not told her about Marcus Cole. He had not told her because telling her meant things would move, and he was not ready for things to move. He had felt that way for 6 weeks. He had been patient and careful and strategic in the way that people are strategic when they feel they have very little power and must be precise about how they spend it. But something had changed in the last few days. Something small and structural had shifted. The marker on the inside of his locker, the look on Marcus's face that morning, Pete's phone, and the man at the bus stop. Whatever you are building here, it comes back. Eli lay there and looked at the ceiling. He thought about Nina. He thought about what she would do if he told her. He could picture it clearly. She would sit very still and listen to everything, and then she would ask 3 or 4 precise questions, and then she would say very little, and then she would act. He had always found that quality in her both reassuring and slightly frightening. He reached for his phone. He pulled up her number. He stared at it for a while. Then he put the phone face down on his chest and closed his eyes. Not tonight, maybe tomorrow, maybe soon. But not yet. 3 weeks passed. They passed the way time passes when you are watching for something. Not slowly, exactly, but with a particular texture, each day present and accounted for in a way that ordinary days are not. Marcus won his Friday game. The whole school knew about it by Monday. He walked the hallways that week with the particular energy of someone who has just been right about himself in front of an audience, which is one of the best feelings a 17-year-old who relies on the opinion of others can have. He had been easing off Eli slightly, not out of any change of heart, but simply because new things had his attention. The game, the expected letter, a girl named Kara who sat 2 rows ahead of him in English and who had started texting him things that were worth thinking about. The pressure on Eli had not disappeared, but it had become less frequent. Still the nickname when their paths crossed. Still the particular way Marcus and Craig would go quiet and then exchange a look when Eli passed their lunch table. But the active, daily targeting had faded into something lower and wider, like a sound that you stop hearing individually, but that still fills the room. Eli noticed the change. He filed it the way he filed everything, carefully, without celebration, without fully trusting it. Because he had spent enough time watching Marcus Cole to know that the easing off usually meant something else was building. He was right about that. He just did not know yet what form it would take. On a Thursday afternoon, 3 weeks after the bus stop, Nina Marsh finished her shift at the district office, sat in her car in the parking garage for 11 minutes, and called her brother. He answered on the second ring, which meant he was home and not doing anything that required both hands. "Hey," he said. "Hey," she said, "how are things?" It was not quite a question. Nina rarely used full question marks. She had a way of making space in a sentence that invited honesty without demanding it. There was a pause, 2 seconds, maybe 3. "Things are okay," Eli said. "Okay means different things," Nina said. Another pause. And then, for the first time since the school year had begun, Eli told his sister what had been happening. He told her about the first day at the lunch table, about the nickname, about the morning at the lockers, about the shove on the stairs and the railing and the look on Marcus Cole's face. He told her about the marker on the inside of the locker door. He told her about Pete and the phone and the filming. He told her everything except the man at the bus stop, because he was not sure yet how to explain what that had meant or why he had held on to it. Nina listened without speaking. When he finished, she asked her 3 questions. They were precise and factual. How long, how many times were there witnesses? Then she said, "Okay." Then she said, "I'm glad you told me." Then, after a pause, "I'm going to look into some things." Eli said, "Nina." "I'm not going to storm in anywhere," she said. "I'm just going to look." He was quiet. "That's all," she said. She meant it. She was telling the truth as far as she went. She was going to look into some things. She was going to be careful and methodical, and she was not going to do anything that would make his situation worse. But Nina Marsh had been managing chaos for people who created it for 2 years, and she had a particular skill for finding the threads in a complicated situation and pulling the right ones. She knew that Pete had a phone. She knew what phones recorded. She knew what happened to recorded things when they went online. And she knew that at the district office, there were people who dealt with exactly this kind of situation, and that those people had processes, and that those processes, when followed correctly, had consequences. She started to look. The videos were not hard to find. Pete had uploaded 3 of them to a public account with the school's name in the profile, which he had done because he was 16 years old and had not thought carefully about what public meant. The account had 31 followers, most of them students from Westfield. It was not widely seen, but it was there. Nina found it on a Friday evening, sitting at her kitchen table with a cup of tea going cold beside her. She watched the videos once. Then she sat very still for a moment. Then she picked up her tea, which was cold, and drank it anyway and thought about what she was going to do. She did not act immediately. She spent the weekend thinking. She turned the situation over carefully, the way you turn something fragile before deciding how to set it down. On Monday morning, she went to the district office and asked, casually, about the correct process for reporting documented student conduct incidents involving social media content. She asked as though it were a general question, not a personal one. The colleague she asked, a woman named Diane who had worked there for 16 years and knew every process and procedure by heart, explained the protocol clearly and completely. Nina listened. She took a single note. Then she went back to her desk and continued doing her job. She did not tell Eli what she had found. Not yet. She was being careful. She was thinking about him, not about the satisfaction of doing something fast. At roughly the same moment that Nina Marsh was at her desk choosing patience over reaction, a man named Gary Frost was sitting in a conference room at Westfield High School and meeting with the school's athletic director about a forthcoming scholarship offer. Gary Frost worked for a university's athletics program. He was responsible for identifying student athletes worth recruiting, and he had been following Marcus Cole's performance for 2 seasons. Marcus was genuinely talented. That part was straightforward. The question was whether the talent came with the kind of profile that the university was comfortable attaching its name to. The university had, in recent years, been very specific about this. They had made it a formal part of their evaluation process. Academic standing, community conduct, digital footprint. All 3 were assessed before any offer was made. Gary Frost had a team of people who ran those assessments. They were thorough and they were efficient, and they used standard tools that anyone with an internet connection and a few hours could use. 2 days after Gary Frost's meeting with the athletic director, one of his colleagues typed Marcus Cole's name into a search and found Pete's public account within 4 minutes. She watched the videos. She wrote a short note in the file. The file went back to Gary Frost. He read the note on a Wednesday afternoon, leaned back in his chair for a moment, and then made a decision that took less than 60 seconds. He had made the same kind of decision before. He would make it again. It was not complicated once the information was in front of him. He picked up the phone. He called the athletic director. He said that the university would not be moving forward with the offer at this time. He did not explain in detail. He did not need to. The athletic director said he understood. The call was 12 minutes long. 11 of those minutes were about something else entirely. Marcus Cole did not know about any of this. He went to school that Wednesday. He had practice in the afternoon. He went home, ate dinner, did some homework, and went to sleep. He was, in his own estimation, in the best stretch of his school year. The game had gone well. He was expecting good news in the spring. Things with Kara were interesting. The hallways still belonged to him. He did not know that a colleague of Gary Frost's had found Pete's account. He did not know that the account still had the school's name in the profile. He did not know that Nina Marsh had, the previous week, submitted a formal conduct report to the district office, citing the videos as documented evidence of a pattern of behavior, and that the report had been logged and assigned to the school's vice principal for review. He did not know that these 2 separate processes, the university's background review and the district's conduct review, were both in motion at the same time, moving like 2 separate rivers that had not yet reached the place where they joined. He did not know any of it. He went asleep easily, the way he always did. He dreamed about the game. He did not dream about the bus stop. He did not dream about Alan Briggs, or the 10 words, or the particular quiet way they had been delivered. But the words had not gone anywhere. They were still in the world. They were just moving through it more slowly than consequences usually do, gathering weight as they went, becoming something larger and harder and more real than a laugh at a bus stop had made them seem. Whatever you are building here, it comes back. The bus had arrived. Everyone had boarded. Alan Briggs had sat near the front and looked out the window as the city went by. He had not expected the boy to listen. He had said it anyway. Because sometimes the point of saying a true thing is not that it is heard in the moment. Sometimes the point is that it is in the air, and that the air eventually carries everything. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. Not the letter Marcus was expecting. He had been expecting something else entirely, the wide envelope, the kind with weight to it, the kind that arrives when a decision has gone in your favor and the institution sending it wants you to feel that from the moment you pick it up. He had been expecting it for weeks. His mother had started asking about it every few days. His coach had sent him a text the previous Thursday saying, "Any day now," with a single thumbs up that Marcus had looked at more than he would have admitted. What arrived instead was a standard envelope, white, no weight to it, his name typed on the front in clean, administrative font. He opened it in the kitchen, standing at the counter, still in his jacket because he had just come through the door. He read it once. He read it again. The letter was from the university's athletic recruitment office. It was one paragraph long. It said that, after careful review, the university would not be moving forward with the athletic scholarship offer at this time. It cited conduct inconsistent with community standards and thanked him for his interest in their program. One paragraph. Marcus stood at the kitchen counter for a long moment. The refrigerator hummed. The afternoon light came through the window at a low angle and made a stripe of gold across the floor. He read the letter a third time. Then he set it down on the counter very carefully, the way you set something down when your hands have stopped feeling fully reliable. His mother came into the kitchen 20 minutes later and found him sitting at the table, the letter in front of him, not moving. She asked what it was. He pushed it toward her without speaking. She read it. He watched her face change. She sat down across from him. Neither of them said anything for a while. "What does conduct inconsistent with community standards mean?" she said finally. "I don't know," he said. But he was beginning to. The suspension came 2 days later, on a Thursday morning. He was called into the vice principal's office before first period. The vice principal, a man named Mr. Garrett who wore the same style of khaki trousers every day, and who had the particular patience of someone who had seen most of what a school building could produce, sat behind his desk and explained what had been brought to the district's attention. A formal conduct report, documentation of a sustained pattern of behavior toward a fellow student, video evidence on a public social media account, a record of multiple incidents over approximately 6 weeks. Mr. Garrett used careful, measured language. He did not raise his voice. He did not use the word bullying, though it was the word that lived in the center of everything he was saying. He said documented behavioral pattern and pattern of conduct toward a peer, and material submitted by a third party. Marcus sat across from him and listened and felt something happening in his chest that he did not have a name for. It was not quite fear. It was something more structural, like the feeling of standing on a floor and realizing it is not as solid as it looked. He was suspended for 5 days pending a full district review. His parents would be contacted. The review would take up to 2 weeks. During that time, his participation in school activities, including athletic practice and games, was suspended as well. He walked out of Mr. Garrett's office and into the hallway, which was full of students passing between classes. No one knew yet. They would know soon. These things spread fast in a building where everyone knew each other. But right now no one knew, and Marcus walked through the hallway the same way he always walked through it, and no one looked at him any differently. For possibly the last time in that building, he was still Marcus Cole, whose hallway it was, whose name was known, whose letter was supposed to have been coming any day. He pushed through the front door of the school and went down the wide steps and across the parking lot and called his mother. She did not answer. He called again. She answered on the third call, and he told her what had happened, standing in the school parking lot on a Thursday morning with the sky flat and gray above him, and the trees along the far fence bare of almost all their leaves. His mother arrived 30 minutes later. She pulled into the parking lot and he got in, and they sat there for a while without driving anywhere. "Who filed the report?" she said. "I don't know," he said. He thought about it, though. He thought about who it could be. He thought about who had something to say and the means to say it and the reason to say it now. He went through the possible names, and some of them were obvious, and some of them surprised him, and one of them he kept coming back to, kept circling, because it fit in a way that he could feel but not yet fully explain. He thought about Pete's phone. He had not known, until this moment, how much of what Pete filmed had actually gone online. He had assumed it was one video, maybe two, kept private or shared with a small group. He had not imagined a public account with the school's name attached. He looked out the car window at the parking lot. He thought about the man at the bus stop. He thought about 10 words said quietly to no one in particular. "Whatever you are building here, it comes back." He had laughed. He had laughed in the full, performed way that signals to everyone watching that the thing being laughed at is not worth a serious response. He had put maximum distance between himself and those words the only way he knew how. And the words had come back anyway. Not as drama. Not as a confrontation, not as a fight, not as anything he could have braced himself for. Just a standard white envelope with no weight to it, and a paragraph, and a door closing. He sat in his mother's car in the school parking lot. She was quiet beside him. He thought about the spring, about what he had been planning on, about the conversations he had already had, the assumptions he had already built into his idea of the next year. The next 2 years, the shape of a future that had seemed so settled he had stopped thinking of it as something that could change. "Marcus," his mother said. "Yeah," he said. She did not say anything else for a while. Then, who was the kid? And he knew immediately which kid she meant. "His name is Eli," he said. He said the name, and it sat in the air of the car between them. And it was different from the way the nickname had sounded, different from the way the laughter had sounded, different from all of it. It was just a name. A regular name belonging to a regular person who had sat at the wrong lunch table on the first day of school, and had not done anything after that to deserve any of it. Just a name. Marcus looked at the bare trees along the far fence. The branches made a pattern against the gray sky, complicated and precise, and he looked at that pattern for a long time and did not look away. The district review took 11 days. During those 11 days, Marcus was home. He was not grounded, not formally, but there was no reason to go anywhere, and his mother was around more than usual, which meant the house had a different quality to it, quieter in some ways, louder in others. Craig texted him twice on the first day and then went silent. Pete did not contact him at all. Owen sent one message on the third day that said, "Hope you're okay, man," and then nothing more. Marcus read it and put his phone down and did not reply. He spent a lot of time doing nothing in particular. He watched television. He slept later than usual. He sat at the kitchen table with a mug of coffee he had started drinking because it gave his hand something to do. He thought about a lot of things during those 11 days, and he thought about them differently than he had thought about anything in a long time. Not because he was unusually reflective by nature. he was not, but because there was nothing else to do. The structure that usually organized his day was gone. Football was gone. The hallway was gone. The easy familiarity of being somewhere he was known and comfortable was gone. He was left with the kitchen table, and the mug and the bare trees outside the window, and the things he had done. He thought about Eli Marsh, sitting on the floor picking up his books one by one. He thought about the look Eli had given him after the railing, that clear, quiet, uncollapsed look that had bothered him in a way he had not examined at the time and was examining now. He thought about Lucy, the girl who sat with Eli at lunch, who had noticed the situation and said nothing where Marcus could hear, but who had been watching. He thought about all the people who had been watching. He thought about what it must have been like to be Eli Marsh, walking into that school every morning. He did not arrive at comfortable answers. There were none available. On the 7th day, he looked up Eli's name online, not to do anything, just to look. He found a school profile page, a standard directory thing, name and grade and a small photo. He looked at the photo for a long time. He closed the tab. On the 9th day, his mother came and sat across from him at the kitchen table and said, "I want you to tell me everything." Not as a threat, not as an accusation, just as a request from a woman who had been patient for 9 days and who loved her son and who needed to understand what had happened before she could figure out how to help. He told her everything. It took a long time. She did not interrupt. At certain points her expression changed in ways he caught and could not quite look at, so he looked at the table instead. When he was done, she sat there for a moment. "Did you ever think about what it was like for him?" she said. "No," he said. It was the truest thing he had said in weeks. She nodded. She did not react to it dramatically. She just received it, the way you receive a piece of information you needed to have in order to go forward. "Okay," she said, "we'll figure out what comes next." She got up and made more coffee, and they sat together in the kitchen, and the day outside was gray and cold and ordinary. The review concluded on the 11th day. Marcus was allowed to return to school on a probationary basis, with mandatory meetings with the school counselor for the remainder of the semester. His participation in athletics was reinstated after 2 additional weeks pending a review by the coaching staff. He returned to school on a Monday. The hallway was different, or rather, the hallway was exactly the same and he was different in it. He walked through it without the old ease, without the feeling that the space was arranged around him. He was aware of being looked at, aware of what people knew, aware that the particular kind of authority he had carried through these corridors for 2 years had changed into something else overnight, the way certain things change, not gradually, but all at once. He did not see Eli that first morning, or the second. On the 3rd day, he saw him at the far end of the hallway, walking with Lucy, both of them talking about something, and Eli glanced in Marcus's direction once and then looked away and kept walking. Marcus stopped just for a moment, then he kept walking too. He went to his first counseling session that Thursday. The counselor was a woman named Ms. Farrell who had short gray hair and the particular quality of someone who did not need to fill silence with words, which Marcus found both uncomfortable and, eventually, useful. She asked him questions. He answered them. The answers were not always clean or comfortable, but they were honest, which surprised him slightly, and which she received with the same steady patience with which she seemed to receive everything. He went back the following week, and the week after. Something was happening in those sessions that he did not have precise words for. He was not fixed. He did not leave each session feeling better in any simple way, but he was being asked to look at things he had avoided looking at, and there was something in the looking that was, slowly, beginning to feel necessary. 2 years later. Marcus Cole was 19 years old and worked a morning shift at a distribution warehouse on the far side of town. He was on his feet for 8 hours, moving packages along lines and loading trucks, and he was good at it, and he came home tired in a way that he had started to find satisfying. He took 2 evening classes at the community college, English composition and introductory business, and was doing well in both. His composition teacher had written a note on his last paper that said he had a genuine voice, which he had read 3 times and then put in the drawer beside his bed. The football scholarship was not coming back. He had understood that within the first week of the district review and had spent a long time in the months after that learning how to build a different version of the future he had been planning. It was slower. It required more. But it was there, and it was his, and it was not built on anything that someone else could take away with a paragraph. He had tried to contact Eli Marsh. He had found Eli's email address through a mutual contact, a former classmate who was still in touch with both of them, and he had composed 4 separate emails over the course of 6 months. The first 3 he had deleted without sending. They were too long, or too explanatory, or too focused on how he himself felt, which was not the point. The 5th email was 2 paragraphs long. The first paragraph said what he had done and that he was sorry. The second paragraph said that he did not expect a reply and that whatever Eli chose to do with the email was entirely his right. He sent it on a Tuesday evening after his shift, sitting at his kitchen table with a glass of water and the lamp on, and the window showing the dark street outside. Eli read the email. He did not reply. Marcus knew about it because the mutual contact, without being asked, mentioned it once in passing that Eli had read it, just that, nothing more. Marcus had sat with that for a while. He had wanted to ask more. He had not asked more, because the email had not been for him. It had been for Eli, and what Eli did with it was not his to decide or manage or need. He lived with the silence. It was not comfortable. He did not expect it to become comfortable. He had started to understand that certain things you do cannot be undone, and can only be responded to, with time, with honesty, with the kind of changed behavior that happens when no one is watching, and there is no audience, and there is no reward for it except the fact of it. The man at the bus stop. Marcus had thought about Alan Briggs more times than he could count. He did not know the man's name. He had never learned it. He had tried, in a vague and uncommitted way, to find out, asking the mutual contact if she remembered the man, once mentioning him to his mother in a way that did not quite convey how much he had been thinking about him, but nothing had come of it. The man was simply a figure. A mid-50s man in a gray jacket at a bus stop on a Wednesday in October, who had said 10 words to no one in particular, and then looked back down the road. Marcus thought about him the way you think about something that you cannot hold on to, but cannot put down. He had laughed at those words. He had laughed at them with the full, performed confidence of someone who is certain they do not apply to him. He had filed them in the category of things that come from people who do not understand, who do not know how things work, who are speaking from some experience that has no bearing on his. He had been wrong about that. He had been wrong about most of it. On Thursday evenings, Marcus Cole went to a youth mentorship program that operated out of a community center 12 minutes from his apartment. He had started going 6 months earlier, not quite sure what he expected, and had kept going because something about it felt necessary in a way he could not fully articulate. He worked with boys between 13 and 16. He helped with homework sometimes. He sat with them when they wanted to talk and was quiet with them when they did not. He did not try to be something dramatic. He did not frame himself as someone who had turned his life around, because that framing was too clean and too simple and required a version of events that left things out. What he did instead was tell the truth. On a Thursday evening, 6 weeks into his time at the program, one of the boys, a 14-year-old named Cole, which Marcus had privately noted and privately found significant, had talked about a situation at school that was familiar in its structure. Not the same, but the same shape. A person with a little power using it on someone with less. Marcus had listened until Cole was done talking. Then he had told his story. He had not dressed it up. He had not given it a clean ending. He had described what he had done clearly, without softening the parts that were hard to say. And then he had described what happened. And then he had described the last 2 years, which included the warehouse and the evening classes and the sessions with Ms. Farrell that had continued, in a different form, through a community program after he graduated. He had not made himself the cautionary tale with a redemption arc, because that kind of story still makes the teller the center, and the teller was not the center of this one. At the end, he had said this. A man said something to me once that I laughed at. I laughed at it in front of people, as loud as I could on purpose. Because I thought the best way to deal with something true is to make everyone around you treat it as a joke. He had paused. It came back anyway, every single bit of it, not because of him, not because of anyone other than me and the things I had decided to do. Cole had looked at him. The room was quiet in the way that rooms get quiet when something real has just entered them. Do you still think about him? Cole asked. The man from the bus stop. Yeah, Marcus said. I think about him a lot. Do you wish you had listened? Marcus looked at the table for a moment. Then he looked back up. I heard him, he said. I just didn't listen yet. Cole nodded slowly. Marcus nodded back. Outside, it was a Thursday night in October, and the air had that particular quality, dry and cool, and carrying the smell of something ending, and the leaves were turning again, and the year was moving through its familiar stages the way years always do, patient and indifferent and absolutely certain of where it was going. Inside, the room was warm. The boys bent back over their homework. Marcus Cole sat at the table and watched them and thought about an ordinary man in a gray jacket who had said a true thing into the air of a bus stop 2 years ago and had not waited to see what happened to it. Some things you say not because you expect them to land. You say them because they are true. And the truth, if you leave it alone, if you do not try to force it or explain it or follow it home, the truth finds its own way. It always does. Every time,